Welcome back, everybody. Today we are working on chapter 11, which is all about working on Marv's spine here. So I've opened up the chapter 11 Marv Bird Rig V5 file that's here. With this, what I noticed is she has the joints and the IK handles hidden, so I'm just going to show those, and then I've turned on X-ray joints. So that's how I'm going to get started here. So again, I'm just using her rig file. I prefer my controls, but just for the sake of consistency, I'll use that. All right, so we're going to do two different spine rigs here, right? So we'll create an FK spine. What I want you to do is once you finish your FK spine, save that out as an FK file, and then we'll do a second type of spine rig. Basically, you'll delete everything that you just did there, and then do a second kind of different version to get a different functionality for that spine. So you'll end up saving out two different rigs for the neck, and we can take a look at the functionality of both of them in class. So the first one we'll do is the FK spine. It's the easiest, right? Basically, that idea is, you'd grab each one of these and you can, rotate them to get this, right? So that's what we will do first. So for this, I'm just going to create a control for each of the joints there. And so I'll use that Rig 101 wire controller. So probably for this, actually circles would work just fine to sort of go around the neck there. So I'll just use the regular old circle. And actually, I'm going to hide the polygons for now. And let me take a look. So that's my spine 2, spine 1. So this is where I need to start creating controls, is on that spine 1 and then up all the way. Actually, what I'm going to do just to simplify this is I'm going to hide the arms just to get them out of the way. I can also grab that lower body and hide that just to kind of clean up my view here. We'll make it easy. So we need a control for that spine 1 and then every joint going up to the top. So I'll start there. So I'll create a circle. I'll snap that into the spine 1 joint. Actually, do want to see my polygons here to see if I can get something that works. Yeah, something like that might work just fine. All right, I'm just going to end up making all the controls first, and then I'll go back and clean them up here. So again, I'll hide my polygons, and then I'll just create new controls for everything. All right, so here are all of my controls. I just placed them at their proper spot. Again, super important that the pivot point of each control is snapped to that same joint so that they can rotate in the same direction. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and delete history, freeze transformations, and rename all of them before I start connecting them. Okay, so each one of my controls has been renamed, has deleted history, has frozen transformations, right? Of course, all the names of each of the controls match the names of the joints, right? So next 6 joint has next 6 control, and the same for all of them, right? So at this point, now what we want is for this FK spine, we want to create our offsets so that the orientations of our controls match the orientations of the joints themselves, right? This is a great example where you can see the joint has an orientation this way, right, where it is sort of rotated back in terms of its orientation. and then the control has one that's simply based on the world because I've frozen the transformations. So I'd like those to match up just to really get really clean controls here. So we're going to do that offset controller script for each spine and neck joint here, right? So I have that offset script saved as a custom button. Feel free to use it however you'd like. Right, so remember what you're going to do with that script is you're going to select the control first, followed by that joint, and then run the script. And if it worked, you should see done. And also, you'll see that that control now has the offset group, which has the rotation values from the orientation of that joint there, right? So we'll do that for each one. Okay, so I've created all of these offset groups here, right? And now I just need to connect the controls to actually move, or rather rotate my joints here. So again, I'm going to go one by one, selecting the driver, the control, followed by the driven, which is the joint. And in this case, we're going to do an orient constraint. You can keep maintain offset on or off. It doesn't matter because we've already got that offset group that is solving that issue for us. So again, I'm going to go one by one from the control to the joint and do an orient constraint. Cool. So everything should be hooked up properly now. Just make sure that you did the orient constraint properly. If you select any of your controls and you have any blue markers here, that means you did it backwards. So I just like to double check to make sure I didn't accidentally do anything backwards, right? You'll notice the joints have that blue, which I'm talking about, right? That says there's an incoming connection here, and we can see that orient constraint. So if you see that on any of the control, you did it backwards. Just delete the orient constraint and do it correctly the other way. All right, and then of course, now that we have these things connected, let's just quickly test to make sure each one of those joints is working. Very nice. All right, the orientations of the controls are matching the joints. Great. So each of my controls is working properly. And now we need to set up the hierarchy to get all of the controls to move with the neck, right? So it's fairly simple. We just have to make sure you do it in the right order because we have these offset groups involved. So I'm just going to actually drop down each one of these offset groups here, right? And so basically the offset group will be the child of the control above it, right? So in this case, you can work from sort of top down or bottom up, either way. I'm going to go sort of this way. So the next 7 control offset group will be a child of the next 6 control. Make sure you deselect at this point because currently that's still selected. So if I parented this here, you'll notice that that next 7 control offset group is the child there. So just make sure you deselect before you connect up the next one here, right? So the next 6 control offset group, child of neck 5. Cool. So again, I just middle mouse those, middle mouse drag. And then what I like to do is just expand the whole hierarchy here. You could even just grab that last control and hit F. Just to make sure that it looks like this. So it should cascade down, alternating between the offset group and the control for each one of them, just like that. All right, that looks good to me. Let's test. So if I rotate this, all the controls should move with it, which looks great, and I should be able to get all the functionality that I want. Cool, pretty good. So grab all my controls, not the offset groups, and then set the rotations to 0 to get that back into place. Right, remember we want the rotational value to sit in those offset groups. That's how the offset is working, so you don't want to freeze the transformations there or set those back to 0 because that will break what we created. All right, so last thing to do is let's connect this into our hierarchy here. So if we open up that control group, we have the root control, and then we have the upper body offset group followed by the upper body control. And so this spine 1 control offset group will be a child of the upper body control, right? It's the same way, just continuing that hierarchy. So if we used, what, that's her root, lower body. So her upper body, if we rotated the upper body, now all of the neck controls will also rotate with it. Cool. So that's the FK spine. Really, it's not too complicated. It's a lot of, rinse and repeat. In this case, using really simple circles works quite well. And as long as you do the steps in the right order, you'll end up with a really functional neck. And this is nice. And you can get a lot of really, really nice clean arcs with this animation, which is really easy and customizable. We could do a set-driven key with this, and that's what she does next. Basically, the idea of could you create a slider of sorts that would curl the whole neck forward or curl the whole neck backwards, right? And so that's what she sets up with this SDK spine following this. So what I would do is save this here. So I'll go ahead and save as. And I'll call this one rig v5 fk, right? So it's just like my fk file. I'll get rid of that. All right. And then next we'll do this set-driven key, and then I'll save out that as an SDK, and then we'll do the spline spine, and I'll save that out as a different file. So we just have 3 different rigs, essentially. All right, so to create the set-driven key functionality, basically we just need to create another group node over the top of our controllers here, right? If you remember that Medusa chapter, right, we want the animator to be able to manually rotate each one of these joints, but we can't also have the set-driven key connected directly to that control because then you have 2 different incoming connections. And so we need a group joint, a group over that control that will do the set-driven key, and then the control itself will be manually edited by our animator here. So what I'm going to do is go one by one. I'm going to grab each control and group it. So if we look at our hierarchy, it'll look like this. And so this one will be spine 1 SDK group. Right, and so we'll have the offset group, the SDK group, and the spine 1 control for each one of them. It's really important with this SDK group that the pivot point is in the same spot, right? It's in that same exact joint. Otherwise, this won't work well for you. And it should automatically be there because of that offset group that we've created. It should automatically take that position and orientation really cleanly. So just double check that it's in there because it's really important that it is there. So we're going to do that for each control. Be careful like this. I got in sort of a groove which led me to create a mistake. I forgot to group this neck 5 control and I just actually renamed it. So just pay attention while you're doing it. So let me reset that neck 5 control, then I'll group it, and then create that neck 5 SDK group. So just pay attention. It's really easy to have a little brain fart there. So just double check everything. I did it again for neck 6 here too. So that should be right. Again, I'm just double checking my entire hierarchy here just to make sure that I have it. So again, it should be starting with the spine 1 should be offset group, SDK group, control for each one. As part of my double checking, actually I noticed that for some reason the control and the SDK group don't have the exact same pivot point. I'm not sure why. So I'm just going to go to that SDK group, make sure it is snapped in to the joint there. I also want to make sure that controls pivot point, ooh, that one was a little bit off there, but it should be okay. Okay, that should be all right. So just double checking each of those things. So the idea with this set-driven key is that when the spine 1 control rotates forward or backwards, all of the other controls are also going to rotate forward or backwards, and that's how we can create this sort of a really easy curl forward or back with one really easy motion, while also giving the ability to customize each individual control, right? So I'm going to go to the animation menus and then key and set driven key set options. To make this a little bit cleaner, what I'm going to do is grab each of the SDK group nodes and then lock the translate and the scale. Ooh, lock the translate and the scale. So in this case, for my driver, it's going to be my spine 1 control. And it's the rotate Z that I'm going to be using here. And then for my driven, it's going to be all the SDK groups. So I could, like I've done before, I could go and click through all the SDK groups here. Or what I could do is if I go to this section here, and again, it may be hidden on yours, just like click out these. You can go select by name. And so I could type in SDK group, if I spelled it properly. Or maybe an asterisk in front of that. There we go. And that will really quickly select all of those SDK groups in here. Now I don't obviously want it to grab the other SDKs that I might have made, so I'm just sort of double checking that it's not grabbing from anything else, which is not, because I don't have any other set driven key in here. Cool. So I'm going to load that as driven, and that'll grab each of those and select them here. I actually probably don't even need that spine 1 SDK group, is sort of what I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm not sure actually that one is necessary because we're going to be rotating that spine 1 control, and so that actually wouldn't be having any sort of effect there. So that one might be useless, to be honest. So anyways, I'll select all of them except that spine 1 SDK group and click on the rotate Z, right? So the rotate Z of the spine 1 control will affect the rotate Z of all of these set driven key groups. Which is pretty cool. So in the neutral pose, I'm going to key it, right? So when this is at 0, all of those will be at 0. Next, we want to set our forward extreme position. So I'm going to rotate this, I don't know, maybe to there. And then what we need to do is rotate the SDK groups to get the curl that we want, right? So don't grab the control here and do this to get that pose, because that won't do anything for us. You need to do it by grabbing each of the set-driven key groups to get that look, because that's actually what we're connecting here. So that looks kind of nice to me. Feel free to make whatever curl you want, but I'm going to do something kind of like that as my forward position. So once I'm happy with that, I will key it. Which should give me the ability to, oops, that's the wrong control, to rotate my spine 1 control straight. Oh, you know what? I rotated my spine 2 control. That's the problem. So make sure that you're rotating the proper things. Again, all of that is important. So again, just kind of take it slow. If you break something, figure out, where did you make the mistake and go from there. Cool. So now it's time to set that backwards position here. So same idea, I'm going to rotate that spine 1 control back and then work on creating the backwards curl from these SDK groups here. So that looks pretty good. Looks like it hurts. But again, we're setting those extreme poses that the animator can use. So now that I'm pretty happy with that, I will key it. And then it should work if I rotate my spine 1 control forward. Right, so I can animate between that forward curl and that backward. Nice. So that is the set-driven key on the FK. And of course, remember, now that we have this set up on those group nodes, we still have the ability to rotate each of the controls individually and customize what that looks like. Cool. So let me grab each of those SDK, or sorry, not the SDKs, but I'll grab each of those controls, and I just want to set them back to their neutral spot. After my testing, remember just the controls here, and that should put me back in place. Cool. So I'm going to save this one out, and I will call this one same thing. So V5 SDK. We could do the same thing, the set-driven key and the rotate X and Y if you wanted to, which would be kind of nice to get a kind of a curl that way or a curl that way, as well as a nice, really cool twist in that rotate X. So you could twist the whole neck based on the kind of twisting of, yeah, maybe not that one, but maybe like a twist here would also twist the entirety of the neck, or maybe even there might make more sense, right? So if you twisted the neck to control, it would twist each of the SDK groups for the controls above it, and that might be really nice. I'm not going to do it, and you don't have to, but just kind of pushing that idea further. What could you do with that SDK? All right, so the last type of spine we're going to do is the spline spine, which is a really, really fun, kind of curvy, flexible spine, which would work really well for Marv's neck here. So I'm just going to use this file here and modify it. You could also start with the file she mentions in the book, but I'll just start with this. So basically, we're going to delete all of the FK controls that we've created, except for the spine 1 control and the spine 2 control. So we'll grab all of this stuff in the neck and get rid of it. I don't need the SDK groups, but I do want the offset controls, right? Because that gives the functionality to our control. So I'm just going to do some reparenting of, I'm going to move the spine 1 control back to the offset group, and then I can delete the SDK group, and same thing with spine 2. So I'll move the spine 2 back to the offset group and delete the SDK, right? So it should look something like this, right? And again, just sort of testing again to make sure that this still functions the way we want to. Cool, looks good. All right, so now we're going to create our spline spine by utilizing an IK actually. So let me show my joints here. So if I go back to my rigging menus and go to skeleton, we're going to create an IK spline handle. So I'll use the default settings here, and make sure the number of spans is 2 is what she has. And then the twist type is ease in out, which is what she wants. And we can play with that actually later on, but I'm just going to use what she uses here. All right, so we're going to create this spline handle from the neck 1 joint to the neck 7 joint. So that is this one to that one. Right, I noticed a little bit of a pop in the neck there, so I might kind of pay attention to that and see if that created any real issues for me. It should be okay. It's not terribly drastic, so I'm fine living with that. Cool. So if I grab that IK handle, I can't really do anything with it. I don't even have my move tools showing up, right? So I can select other things and I have the move widget, but even like selecting that IK handle is not even an option for me. Same with rotate. I could scale it, not that that does anything, but you can't really do anything with this end effector. So it means that we can't actually move that IK handle. So I'm going to rename this to neck IK, right? Keep everything clean. So if we hide the geometry and the skeleton, we can see that this curve has been created, and that's actually the thing that we care about, is this curve here. Now what's interesting is we have this neck IK, and you can see what that IK looks like, and if you grab the neck IK, it actually doesn't select that curve. We can't even see that curve is connected to the neck IK here in our outliner. But this is the curve that's going to be super useful for us. So if I select that and hit F over here in the outliner, here is the curve that's been created. It's under the neck 1 joint here. And so this is actually what is going to control the joints. And the way that it works is by moving the control vertices of the curve. So if I show my joints real quick, you can see that if I pull the control vertices, we can get a really, really cool, kind of twisty, really organic animation. I would not actually move the bottom one or the top one. Maybe the top, but not the bottom one for sure, because that's where it connects. So you can see we get like really, really cool, interesting, cool twisty stuff. I'm going to undo all that to get that back into place. So that's pretty neat, right? And that's how we're going to move this spline spine. Now, obviously, moving these CVs is not really a practical way to do this, and so we are going to create a control that drives each one of those control vertices, basically. So I'm going to just, with that curve selected, again, to just keep everything renamed, we will call this one neck curve. So I'm going to go to select by component type and make sure that the joints are not selected here, which will allow me to easily grab those control vertices, right? So I just have this this first one turned on, and so it won't actually grab the joints. It's a really easy way to kind of minimize frustration. Cool. So on each one of these CVs, we're going to create a cluster. So I'm going to grab the first CV, and then we'll create that cluster. So deform and cluster, right? So we'll do that for each one, and then we will also rename this. So this will be neck 1 cluster, and I'm just going to copy that and do the same for the rest of them. Cool. So I have 5 clusters, and the reason we're creating this cluster is because we can actually attach a control to the cluster. We can't attach a control to that CV, and so the cluster kind of converts it in a way that allows us to grab it, essentially, right? Because we can select a cluster and we can modify its transformation properties, as opposed to a CV, which you just simply can't connect to. So that cluster basically just gives us access to this this information, right? And all the cluster is just one CV, and so it moves everything really cleanly. So that's how we're going to create our controls. So I'm just going to create some basic controls for the 3 middle clusters. Again, I don't want to move this one because that would, oops, it's tough to grab a cluster sometimes. Let me see if I can do it here. So we don't want to move this one because this would just totally break our neck, right? If I bring back the geometry, it just gets really gross. So we don't actually want to move the top one. So I'm going to use that Rig 101, and I'm going to use a cube, and then snap to those clusters. Or fairly close to it. I like using something that's not that circle, because this to me says like this thing, it doesn't just rotate, it does more than that, because it's not circular. I think that's sort of in my mind the connotations of a shape like that. So, and actually for this, because I also would like to get some rotation out of it, I'm going to put the pivot of each of these controls in the closest joint. So in this case, that one's pretty simple. And those are actually fairly straightforward too. So I just want to put the pivot in the closest joint, because I'll have the ability to move the cluster as well as rotate that joint, which would be some nice flexibility in this control. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'll delete history, freeze transformations, and I'll call this one, what does she call it? Neck control 1, and then I'll duplicate it. I'll snap it into the closest joint to the following cluster. then I'm just going to shift the CVs over. Oops. Just to fit with the neck a little bit more. Maybe even rotate it a bit. Cool. Building history, freeze transformations, rename it. Oh, it's already renamed. Awesome. Because I duplicated it. Alright, same thing. I'll duplicate and I'll snap this one into the joint closest to the next cluster. And actually, I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, building history, freeze transformations, and cool. I'll keep that the way it is. I'm going to do the offset controller script again for that rotation, right? Because I want the orientations of these to match with the joints. So we'll do that offset control script. So again, you're going to grab that control followed by the associated joint. Offset control. Cool. And then we need to connect this control to the transformations of the cluster itself, right? So remember, if we're just doing translates on something, all we need to do is that point constraint. So again, it's a little bit tough to select clusters, so I'm going to do it from the outliner here. So I'll grab that control, followed by the neck2 cluster, and then do a point constraint. All right, the next one and the next cluster. Cool, so let me just test this for now. So I should have the ability to move these around. Really cool. All right, let me set all that back into place there, like that. So on the neck controls, we are going to lock the scale here. All right, so then we need a control for the very top of the neck, basically to be able to move that part around. So rather than using this cube, I'm going to do something sort of to the back of Marv here. I think that's probably what she does as well. So I'm going to use this pyramid. I kind of like this because it's, I don't know, for me it kind of points to something. So what I like to do is kind of snap it into that joint. Great. I'll scale it down and then move it back and rotate it to kind of point at that joint there. So I'm just going to kind of keep moving this around. I don't expect that this will be a very frequently used control, so I don't want to give it too much importance really. But something like this that's just sort of, I don't know, would be clear what it does, right? Again, that's always the goal. So I kind of like that, sort of points to what it would affect. So now that I've moved it around again, make sure that the pivot point of the control is in the joint itself. Very nice. And then of course, delete history, freeze transformations, and then rename. So she calls this one neck control 7 relative to that neck 7 joint. So I'll do that same naming here. And then we're going to do the offset control script. And then I'm going to actually create, like she does, she creates a point constraint from here to that cluster as well. So I'll do that. Cool, and that'll give me the ability to do that. So right now these controls are a little bit clunky, especially when you do that. I just sort of lost the control in the head there. And so we're actually going to set it up in a bit how we can get these controls to rotate with the joints themselves. Basically the joints will move the control, sort of a backwards approach here, so that it will stay and remain functional for us for each one of them. So we'll get to that. But before we do that, we're going to work on creating a cool twist control for our neck. So we do need to create a control for this bottom cluster. That way it does move with everything else when we rotate, right? Obviously this currently is not very functional. And And so we need to actually have a control for that bottom cluster so that all of the clusters will move with the rest of our rig. So I'm going to create a control, and basically, again, we don't want the animator to be able to move this for that reason. And so we're going to create a control, but basically lock the attributes for it so that it can't do that. What this is also going to do is allow us to do a really cool twist. If I go to that neck IK, you can see that here we have this twist ability. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag over here. And so we have this really cool twist function that we can do on the neck IK, which is kind of nice. And so what we can do with this control that's going to lock the translates of that bottom cluster is also make it useful to do that twist of the neck. So I'm going to create a control that will be able to rotate, and that rotate will dictate the twist of this IK. So that's what I'm thinking of, like what should I do to kind of give that rotation. And so I'm sort of thinking about a triangle here. Again, I'm thinking this is probably not a control that's used very often, so I don't want to give it a ton of visual importance. Maybe something like that. It sits out, floats in front. Delete history, freeze transformations. This one is going to be neck twist control. This, because it's not actually going to be rotating the joint, we don't need to do the offset control. It's just going to rotate on its own. So just like we did with the rest of them, I'm going to create a point control from the twist to that neck cluster. Point constraint, right? Which would give the animator the ability to do this. We don't want that, so obviously I'm going to really quickly lock the translates so that you can't do that. Cool. So now what I want to do is use this rotation to twist the neck that way or that way. Right, so that's my rotate X. I want to control the twist of that neck IK. Right, so I'm going to grab both the control as well as the neck IK and open up the node editor. Remember all this? I'll graph inputs and outputs, and then I'll find where are those things. So when I select this one, I see that twist, which means I can connect to it. So this is one that I'm looking for. We'll just throw it over there. And then what else do we have? There we go, neck twist control. There's that rotate X that I'm looking for. So it's these two that I want to connect. We can hit 3 to drop them both down. So I want the rotate X to control the twist. Right? Now let's test it. So that's rotating the wrong way, right? It's backwards, but it's working well. So I want to put that basically negative multiplier in here, right? So what I'll do is I'll open up the Hypershade in the create section, look for multiply divide. Cool. And so when it creates here, you'll also notice it creates it over here in the node editor. And basically I just want to connect this into, I'll do the input X. Whoa. It's a little twisty here. You'll notice that when I connect that multiply divide, it actually creates this unit conversion node, which can do everything that I actually want it to do with this. Either way, I could just make that negative and it would work. In my case, I'm just going to use the multiply divide node. So I'm connecting the input X to, or sorry, so rotate X to the input 1. And then my input 2 will be a -1, so I'm just going to multiply it by negative. And then the output X, right, because I'm working in this X space, will go to twist. And so that should just make it go back, right? Remember sushi? There we go. If you wanted to make it rotate faster, you could, again, use that multiplier to get the different results there. But that works. Cool, so we have a functional neck, right? We have the ability to twist back and forth. We can also move each of our neck controls and get some cool shapes out of it. So now let's talk about cleaning up the hierarchy a bit. Let me just undo each of those. Cool, get those back into space. So you probably want to grab each of the offset groups and make them a child of the spine 2 control. That's going to create a real problem. I'm going to save this before I do anything else. So I'm going to save as, and this one will be my, I'll call it spline. So if you connected that, it would get pretty messed up because it'll get all twisted up. So just to show that, boom. So not good things happen because of the twist. Really, here is the one that is really messed up. So what we can do is basically create a level of offset so that there's sort of numbers in between that give us a little bit of a cushion to kind of avoid that issue, essentially. So we're going to grab all of the neck offset groups as well as the neck twist control and group them. This will be the neck group. And then I'm going to make this a child of the spine 2 control. And so that will save me from any of that issue that we were experiencing. So I just want to double check to make sure that these are still functional. Cool. So basically, it didn't like creating those new values, especially in the neck twist. On that IK, it didn't know what to do with it, so it just sort of shoots it way up top. And creating that group node in between just kind of protects it, right? You can see that group node takes on a lot of these extra values that were being passed through. And so basically, sort of like the offset groups do, right, where they take on these associated values. That neck group takes on those values so that each of these controls can just function properly. All right, so next let's test. If I rotate the spine 2 control, you'll notice that we're getting a double transformation, right? So these are all rotating with a single transformation, right? But the joints are rotating twice as much as that control is actually rotating, right? So that's a real issue because this is rotating the IK, which is then rotating the neck as well. So we have to figure out how can we clean out this double transformation here. And so the issue here is actually where that curve was placed in the hierarchy of Marv. So we trusted where that curve existed, and basically Maya did us wrong. That should not be unfamiliar to you. And so we need to move that curve. So we need to find that neck curve. I don't remember where it is, so I'm going to do neck curve. Let me capitalize. There we go. So there's my neck curve. If we go to wireframe mode, I'm just going to hit 4 here, and then rotate that control again, and then click on that neck curve there. So you can see that neck curve is being rotated, and it's being rotated forward by the joint. So this curve is rotating the joint, and the control is rotating the joint and the curve is also getting a second one from the joint, and that's what's creating us this issue, because this control is moving basically this curve twice, right? So we need to get it out from underneath this spine 2 joint and put it in a different spot. So she says select nothing and create a group node, and this group node is going to be the do not touch group. So this is going to be a child of the Marv group, right? So we have our skeleton, our geo, our control, and our do not touch. And then I'm going to put that neck curve into the do not touch group. So now if we rotate the spine 2, that should fix our problem, right? because now that control is not rotating the curve that was created from our IK. And so we're just getting that single rotational value now. Cool. All right, so let's clean up these clusters here. So I'm going to grab all the clusters, group them. We'll call it neck cluster group. That's going to go in the do not touch group. And the neck IKs are part of the skeleton, so I'll just throw that into our skeleton group here. We can turn the visibility off for the do not touch group just so that nothing is visible that is in here, right? We don't want our animator to see those clusters or see that neck curve, stay away from them. So we'll just turn it off, and hopefully they heed our warning to not touch that. So like I mentioned before, this gets pretty, messy, right? When we're just sort of moving these things, especially when we start to lose this one, right? Kind of moving this, and all of a sudden that control gets lost in the head. So that's just messy, right? It's functional, but not great. And so what we could do to make that look nicer is an orient constraint from the joint to that control, right? So kind of do it backwards. So I'm going to do that for each one of these. So I'm going to grab that neck joint and grab the neck control and then do an orient constraint. And so now if we move this around, it gets a little bit cleaner, right? Where the control is actually rotating with the neck a little bit, right? You can see that as it's moving. It's going to be a lot cleaner for the one on top. So I'm just going to do it for each one of them. These, probably don't matter so much in the middle. But again, I'm going from the joint to the control, right? Backwards from what we typically do. But in this one, I think it'll probably give me a much cleaner result. So if I move this one around, so now it's going to be rotating with the head a little bit, right, and sort of stay to the back, which to me is just a much nicer look at what's happening here. So the ones in the middle, less so, right, less important to get that kind of stuff, but it's kind of nice, purely aesthetic, but kind of nice. But the one on top, I think, is quite important to get that one really looking like we can actually use it more than just kind of a little bit. Cool, so set those translates back to 0, right? So it's a pretty cool idea where, right, the control is moving the cluster is moving the control vertex of a curve, which is rotating the joints, and the rotation of the joint is actually rotating the control. Right? There's a lot going on there, but a pretty cool system that we've created. All right, so next thing is working up to the head. Of course, with this head joint, really we're just looking at rotation. So I really like going to the character section of this, and maybe not the character section, the special, and doing the arrows on ball. I think this is just like a great head rotation control. So I'm just going to position this over Marv's head. Now she has a little bit of a discussion actually where to put that pivot point. Basically she's saying she doesn't like that pivot point so far away from the control. It doesn't bother me to have it there, but basically she doesn't like, you select up here and then you're working kind of down there. So it's sort of, up to you. Actually, maybe I will just follow her just to kind of talk about the intricacies of this. So basically, if we were to grab the control followed by the head joint and do our orient constraint with maintain offset on, these will rotate, right? Which is functional, except that the controller stays behind, which is not great. So we need to make sure that that controller will be attached to the head and stay with it. So to do that, I'm going to grab this head feather 1 followed by the head control, and I'm going to do a point constraint on this one. All right, so basically the translate information should affect that. And so now it's not totally perfect, but it's pretty close, that we can rotate from the controller that's rotating the head, and the controller kind of stays attached to the head. Now there's a little bit of a delay, right? When I kind of rotate it, the widget stays behind until you let go. So you may like that, you may not like that. Ask your animator. But that's I don't know, it's kind of nice. Make sure maintain offset is on for the orient constraint that you did to the head joint, as well as for the point constraint from the feather one to the head control. All right, let's on the head control, I'm going to lock the translate and the scale. Oops. All right. So the animator doesn't have the ability to change the translate, but that point constraint will still be able to function, which is good. All right, so where does this head control? If we go open up our skeleton here, right, we have this entire neck that we've created. It's hard to know where we should do it, but what's useful about this is, oh, I probably want to lock that. Is if we move any of these things, well, we'll notice that because we created that point constraint for the head control, it already sticks to where we want it to be. So it actually doesn't need to be a child of anything other than just the control group itself, or rather probably our main control once we create it. We haven't created it, but once we create a main control, it'll be a child of that because it's already moving with the skeleton as is, so we don't need to worry about it. Cool. For each of these, I don't know if she does it later or now or whenever, but I'm just going to make sure that for each of my neck controls that the rotates and the scales are locked. I think I already locked the scales. But I just want to make sure that once the animator gets here, they know that all I want them to do is move this around, not do any rotation. So I'm just going to make sure for each of those that those are locked. So we get this really interesting kind of head rotation now that we've connected this head control, right, in which the head stays totally straight while everything else is rotating, which she calls the chicken head, the chicken head movement, which is really what chickens do, right? If you rotate them around, they do this kind of a thing, which is kind of cool. And so that's what Marv is doing for us. You could kind of go into some more advanced concepts. She shows that could modify how that head would work there. But we're going to keep this as is for now. All right, next thing is we're going to do some mouth controls, right? We want the ability to open both jaws, so this one as well as that one. All right, so we'll need a control for both of our jaws here. So let's grab the 180 thin, I think is what she uses. And I'm just going to snap that straight. I'll do maybe the top beak first. Doesn't matter which one you do first, but I'll start there. Make sure that pivot point is snapped into the joint again, as always. Cool. So once I'm happy with it, as always, delete history, freeze transformations, rename this top beak control. I'll just duplicate this one and snap that to the next joint here. Again, make sure that it is really in that joint. Same idea. Cool. Delete history, freeze transformations, and this one will be my bottom beak control. So just like the head, what we're going to do is we're going to use an orient constraint to rotate that joint and a point constraint to keep it stuck to this position here as well, right? So we'll do that for both of them. So I'll start with the bottom beak. So I'll grab the control followed by that bottom beak joint, And let's pop this off. So orient constraint, maintain offset is on, right? So that gives me the ability to do this rotation. Followed by, I'm going to grab that beak tip and then the control and do a point constraint, right? And so now that should be stuck on there. Cool. And then same thing on the other one. So the top control to the top joint, orient constraint, then the tip to the control, point constraint. Nice. All right, so I'm going to lock the translates and the scales. Oops. For both of them. And that should be good to go. Now the question is, where do they go? So if we rotate the head, the beak is not moving, which is a problem. So in order to fix that, let's work on our hierarchy. So I'm going to grab these two beak controllers and make them children of the head, and then test. All right, so now those will rotate with that head, and we should be able to rotate these just fine. Cool. I'll grab all those and set them back to their neutral state. And that is our neck and our head. I'm going to go ahead and turn these off. Just close this up. And save it out. Cool. So you've done basically 3 different, or really two and a half different kinds of necks, right? The FK, the set-driven key with the FK, as well as the spline, and then set up the head and beak to open up, which should give you really a lot of functionality to animate the upper portion of Marv here. All right. As always, take your time with this. Give yourself plenty of time and go slow. It's really easy to make little mistakes like I did. Just kind of go back and test, because that's when you'll find if you created some sort of issue or not. So constantly be testing your rig once you've created something, and then figuring out, where did that go wrong and how can you modify it from there. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help, and I look forward to seeing your rigs in class.